I've told this story maybe 40 times now. My sister still doesn't believe me. That's fine. I know what I saw. It was a Thursday in late October, outside Kingsmere Palace, and I watched a royal guard, a man trained to stand like furniture while people scream in his face, break formation in under 4 seconds. Not because of a threat, not because of an order, because a 6-year-old boy touched his own ear. Let me back up. I teach photography at a sixth form college in Asheville. Twice a year, I drag 30 teenagers into the city to shoot architecture, and every single time, half of them end up at the palace gates instead, taking selfies with men who aren't allowed to look at them. That morning it had rained hard before dawn, then stopped, and the whole square had that smell, wet stone, cold air, something faintly like coins. The cobbles were still dark. Pigeons kept landing in the puddles and then thinking better of it. The crowd was smaller than usual. October does that. Maybe 150 people pressed along the black railings, mostly tourists in bright rain jackets, a few school groups, one man selling roasted chestnuts from a cart that hissed every time he stirred them. And behind the railing in his box stood the guard. I remember noticing him specifically because of his boots. They were perfect. Not clean, perfect. Mirror black, no scuff on the toe, water beading on them like the leather was refusing to accept the weather. I actually raised my camera and shot them. I still have that photo. It's the last ordinary thing I have from that day. He was young, late 20s maybe, tall but not in a heavy way. His jaw did that thing where you can tell a person is clenching it just slightly, not from tension, just from habit. Bearskin low over his eyes, rifle at his shoulder. He hadn't moved in the 20 minutes I'd been standing there, and I mean hadn't moved. Not a shift of weight, not a scratch. A woman near me was trying to get her toddler to wave at him. The toddler was more interested in a crisp packet on the ground. That was the morning, that's all it was. Then at about 11:15, a small side gate opened. You could feel the crowd's attention change before anyone understood why. It's a physical thing, that 150 people all turning their heads a few degrees. Phones came up. Somebody said, "Is that?" and didn't finish. Out came a nanny in a gray coat, walking fast, and beside her, half skipping to keep up, a little boy in a navy peacoat with the collar turned up wrong. Prince Milo, 6 years old, third in line to a throne he probably couldn't have described. He wasn't supposed to be there. I don't mean that ominously. I mean the crowd hadn't been told. There was no arranged appearance, no photographers besides us amateurs. It was clearly one of those "we're walking from this door to that car" moments that families like his must have 100 times a year, and that we never see. The nanny had one hand on his shoulder, steering. He kept looking sideways at the crowd like a kid checking whether he's in trouble. And then he saw the guard, and his whole face changed. Here's the part where people usually stop me and say, "Hang on, how would you know all that from 30 feet away?" Because I was watching him through a 200 lens, that's how. I had the boy's face filling my viewfinder. I could see the freckle under his left eye. I could see the exact moment his shoulders came down out of his ears. He recognized that guard. There's no other explanation for the way he lit up. But he didn't run to him. He didn't shout. He'd clearly been taught not to. He just walked at the nanny's pace, eyes locked on the man in the box, and there was something almost conspiratorial about it. Like two people passing in a corridor who share a joke nobody else knows. The guard didn't look at him, couldn't, wouldn't. The nanny steered Milo along the inside of the railing, maybe 10 meters from the guard's post, heading for a black car idling near the arch. The crowd was going properly loud now, people shouting his name, a woman actually crying, a teenager from my own class yelling "Milo, mate," like they'd been at school together. I turned to hiss at him, and that's when I heard the horses. You hear them before you see them. Steel shoes on wet cobbles. That, and the little jingle of the bit chains, which is a nice sound until you understand what's attached to it. A mounted detachment was coming through the arch. 4 horses, no urgency, just a routine changeover. But the crowd surged for them, the way crowds do, and the police line at the far end started shuffling people back, and everything in that square shifted about 2 meters to the left in a couple of seconds. Somewhere in that shift, a child fell. I didn't see it happen. Nobody did, that's the whole point. He was 3 or 4 years old in a yellow coat and he'd been sitting on his father's shoulders. When the crowd moved, the father staggered, put the boy down to steady himself, lost him in the forest of legs. The boy sat down on the wet cobbles inside the barrier line, right at the corner where the horses would turn. 150 adults were looking the wrong way. The nanny was looking at the car. The father was looking for his phone. I was looking through a viewfinder at Prince Milo. And Prince Milo was looking at that yellow coat. He stopped walking. The nanny's hand slid off his shoulder because she kept going and he didn't. He stood absolutely still in the middle of that noise, and then he did something I will think about for the rest of my life. He turned toward the guard. He tapped his own chest twice with 2 fingers. Then he touched his ear. That was it. That was the whole thing. 2 seconds. It looked like nothing. It looked like a kid fidgeting. If you'd been standing right next to him, you'd have seen a boy scratch himself. I lowered my camera because I thought I'd missed a shot. And the guard moved. I want to be precise here because the precision is the thing. He didn't hesitate. There was no half-second of should I. His rifle came off his shoulder and into both hands in one motion, and he was out of the box before the sound of it registered. Boots hitting stone. Bearskin tipping back. The crowd made a noise I've never heard a crowd make, not a scream, something lower, a kind of collective inhale. Because in that square, a royal guard leaving his post means one thing, and it is never a good thing. 2 policemen turned. One of them shouted something. The horses were 4 strides from the corner. The lead rider hadn't seen the boy yet, and the guard covered maybe 15 meters in the time it takes to read this sentence. He didn't shout at the child. That's what got me. Children freeze when you shout. He went down on one knee, in the puddle in that uniform. Got one arm around the yellow coat and lifted him clear and stood and stepped back. All of it in a single, unbroken movement. Like it was a drill he'd run 1,000 times, which of course it wasn't. The lead horse passed through the space where the boy had been sitting. Not close, not a film scene near miss. Maybe 2 meters, but 2 meters at that height with those hooves and a 3-year-old sitting down. Then it was over, and the square was silent, and there was a royal guard standing in the middle of it holding a stranger's child, with mud on his knee and his rifle awkward against his hip. He handed the boy to the nearest policeman. He didn't check if anyone was filming. He turned, walked back to his box, same pace, not fast, not slow, stepped up and became furniture again. Water dripping off his cuff. That was the only proof he'd ever moved. The father got to his son about 10 seconds later and made a sound I hope never to hear again. Somebody started clapping and it spread and got very loud and the guard did not blink. People shouted thank you. A woman held her phone up and just cried into it. The chestnut man had come out from behind his cart and was standing there with his tongs still in his hand. And through all of it, the noise, the clapping, the police, the horses, Prince Milo stood exactly where he'd stopped, with his collar still turned up wrong, watching that guard. The nanny had hold of him again. She was talking to him urgently, probably asking what on earth had happened. He wasn't listening. He lifted one hand quite low near his hip, where the cameras mostly wouldn't catch it. And the guard, without turning his head, without moving his eyes, lifted 2 fingers off the stock of his rifle. That's all, 2 fingers, 1/4 of an inch. Then the boy got into the car, and the car left, and the square went back to being a square. I've thought about that signal for 11 years now. Somewhere at some point, in a corridor in a courtyard on some long, boring afternoon, a soldier who wasn't allowed to speak and a small boy who wasn't allowed to be loud invented a way to talk to each other. 2 taps and an ear. Something's wrong. Look, a private language between a child and a man paid to ignore him. And they must have used it for silly things. Rain coming, nannies watching, that pigeon again. The first time it ever really mattered, Milo didn't use it for himself. He used it for a boy in a yellow coat whose name he never learned, whose face he never saw properly, who will grow up and never know that a 6-year-old saw him and a soldier believed him. People ask me what the story is about. Discipline, they say, courage, the moment he broke protocol. But I was the one holding the camera, and I know exactly when the protocol broke. It broke the day a guard decided that if that boy ever signaled, he would go.